I'm Jake Krizak. I used to go to school here. They're not sure exactly what my handicap is, and I'm blind. My center vision is gone. I have peripheral, but my center vision is gone. So that's my starter.
Okay.
That's good. My name is Mike Cooper, and I've been a person with a disability for 40 years this past July 4th. So I'm always the dinosaur in the room. I'm at a stage now where I talk to friends that are still in the disability movement as it's become to be known, and it's interesting in any movement, if you were there for some of the origins of it and you live long enough, you outlive the competition to where all of a sudden you become an expert in the field. So I'm enjoying that part now just because I've spanned enough time that nobody can check my work anyway if they go back 40 years. So I had the opportunity to do a workshop in Grand Rapids this past October for the Michigan Rehabilitation Association that looked at 4 decades of my experience. So it was really a great opportunity because I could slant it any way I want, and remembered the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now into the double digits to look at how attitudes have changed and just where we've come from. So I always feel like the dinosaur in the room when I have a chance to do this. So I'll give some input as we go along. Noah.
My name is Noah Brewster. I've only been in a wheelchair for 4 years. I can't imagine 40 years. It seems like it's been a decade already.
Flies by.
It does, yeah. When you're having fun.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I jumped into a swimming pool August of 2007, and I broke 2 vertebrae in my neck. I believe that's how you were injured.
Water skiing accident.
Water skiing.
Pretty much the same injury there. I was just moving faster.
Yeah. I barely hit my head, but when I did, it tweaked my neck just right. I broke C6 and C7. It's been a challenge. I spent 3 months in the hospital, year and a half in rehab, and it's been rough, but I'm glad I'm still here, finishing up my degree in criminal justice through Ferris State, and trying to move forward. That's all I can do.
I'm Nancy Hartshorn. I teach psychology here at Delta. I'm not a person with a disability, but I have a son who's 22 years old who has severe disabilities. He has something called Charge syndrome, and his major disabilities is that he's deaf and blind. He has some usable vision, which he uses really well. His behaviors are kind of autistic-like, which is very typical of someone who's deaf-blind, because you have to bring everything right to them. You can't, if you're not in their communication bubble where they can see and hear you, then they miss out on everything. So they spend a lot of time kind of in their own little world. He also has balance problems and eating issues. Right now we're dealing with kind of going back in time. When he was 2 years old, he got a feeding tube in his stomach. We spent a long time trying to get his swallow safe enough to be able to feed him orally. We've been feeding him orally for about 8 years, took the G-tube out of his stomach about 6 years ago, and 2 weeks ago he failed his swallow study. So he's been eating. Now all of a sudden he's aspirating everything he eats again. So we're working on therapy. If it doesn't work, we may have to take a step backward and go back to the G-tube, which would be awful for many reasons.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah. But I guess what my point there is that I guess raising a child with a developmental disability from the beginning he has really significant educational needs, significant communication needs, physical, medical needs. He's had like 32 surgeries. Is, for a parent, a marathon. You have to stagger your energy, because if you blow it all at the beginning, you're going to be tired. You have to, just when you think things are going well with my son, like I said, you take 3 steps backward. And it'll be that way for the rest of his and my life, probably. So he's an absolute joy to me. I don't want to paint the picture that it's a big downer, because it's not. He's just an amazing kid, and I'll give you more details, I guess, as we go through.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody have a question they want to start off with? Or? will eventually start on one side of the room and work around.
That's true.
I might start then with a question to Jay. Jay, can you tell us a little bit more about your how you found out about your condition? Because you weren't born in a wheelchair, is that correct?
No, that hurt my arm. But no, I like crawled until I was like 5, and my mom kind of didn't think that was right, so she went and got me looked at. I mean, I got looked at before then, but nothing like really didn't make alarms go off. So but I got looked at when I was 5. Well, I got put in a chair when I was 5, and I've been going back and forth to Ann Arbor since I was like 5 to 15, or birth to 15, but you know, I really started pinpointing it between 5 and 15. And the reason why 15 was my shut-off date was because I got tired of going, because you could go down there and they'd test you like a guinea pig because they wouldn't know what's the matter with you. And I got tired of being poked and pried, and so I quit going because they couldn't figure out anything, and I wanted to enjoy life, you know, and not just lay around and get poked, you know. So I quit going. So basically, I've went through life not knowing what I have. Nobody knows what I have. And then they tell me, I don't know if you guys are good with your abbreviations, but they tell me I got cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, and possibly polio, but they tell me I'm too young for that. And then in '03, October 4th of '03, I lost my center vision, and again went down to Ann Arbor, and they had no reason for it. Besides, all they could tell me was my center nerves died. So, you know, and I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, like positive and negative. So I'm looking as my negative died. So I got my positive. I mean, you're going to find out through today that I have a very loose vocabulary and way of thinking and all that. So I don't want to offend anybody today either. So.
Mike, tell us a little bit more about the services here at Delta and your role that you play since you come.
It's interesting. I mean, if you look at, this is going to sound like lecture time, but if you really look at the population, I mean, that's what I've really grown. I mean, when I went back to CMU after my accident back in 1972, I was the only wheelchair user in the university, other than an instructor of psychology. So I feel like a dinosaur that way, because it wasn't typical to have a significant disability like mine and just go to college or go back to college. And my naivete really paid off. I mean, I was 24 years old when I got hurt. I was your 60s late bloomer who had a lot of other things he'd rather do besides take school seriously. So, I mean, I had just come back from backpacking around Europe for 5 months, and late bloomer. So anyway, I was very naive about it. It never occurred to me not to go back to college. I mean, I just had 1 year left with a teaching degree. I thought, well, even as little as I knew about my disability, I thought, well, I can sit behind a desk as well as stand next to it. I didn't see anything in that profession really that popped up as a major obstacle, as long as I could get in and out of the building. So it wasn't one of those real big forks in the road in terms of career. I could still see myself teaching. So I just assumed I'd go back to CMU. But now I look back at it and talk about naive, because now think about it from a legal aspect. That was 1972. That was a year before the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was even passed, that even got the attention of communities and colleges and businesses about non-discrimination against people with disabilities. CMU wasn't mandated to take me back in any way. So it was really one of those people being with people, which has always been my attitude about it. We can have all the laws you want, but if people aren't sitting down and talking about it and figuring out how to get through it, it's not going to work. You can add any law that you want. Any group along the diversity spectrum has gone through that. The law is one thing. There's a letter of the law and there's a spirit of the law. And if you're not talking spirit, you're going to do bare minimum, what's the least you have to do to comply, that kind of thing.
That still happens today.
And it still happens. 40 years later, it's still happening, but not to the degree that it was happening then. So if it wouldn't have been for housing people and administrators and instructors sitting down going, geez, Cooper, how are we going to do this? I wouldn't have been successful. And I've tried to never forget that part of it. So now, 40 years later, the estimate is that 67% of students in high school coming out with a disability and wanting to go on to higher education are selecting community colleges, 67%. So community colleges across the country have really had to look at those kinds of growth figures and say, how can we provide a level playing field to students coming out of high school that want to go to Delta College? So that's kind of my job. I work with the administrators and faculty and staff to say, what can we provide here that's going to be open door enough to students that they feel they can come here and take the same, not only the same opportunities as any other student, but the same risks, the same scary adventures that other students have in terms of being successful. So it's a small office within other offices, certainly. I'm located in the counseling and advising office. But that I liked. I've been here 7 years, and I've worked with Delta a lot over the last 25 years when I was with an agency in Saginaw, but it was more the barrier-free design. And I certainly wasn't in the beginnings of that, but I take great pride in it because we had the Office of Civil Rights come in here 4 summers ago, and we were listed as probably one of the most barrier-free campuses in the country in terms of community colleges. It's nice to be in flat middle Michigan, isn't it? Right away, we're off to a good start anyways. And then, but it's been the spirit of the law instead of the letter of the law. The letter, let me give you just one example. The letter of the law would be choosing maybe at 2 ends of the college restrooms to make barrier-free. And everything else would amount to signage, directing people like Jake and Noah and myself to where those barrier-free bathrooms are. Instead, you go around Delta and every restroom is barrier-free. And every restroom even has a power door operator, which isn't one of the requirements, for basic compliance. So that's the spirit of the law, and I've always appreciated that philosophy. And it's one that, well, gee, if one restroom's good, then why don't we make them all that way? Same thing with parking. I get complaints all the time because we all run out of parking spots, believe me. But we've got 54 additional parking spots than what the requirements would be for compliance. So we've looked at, I think, along the way, every aspect of it, so that students that want to come here, no matter the disability, have equal opportunity, and that's the whole gist of it.
Great. Who's got a question?
Mike, because I work here, I'm just wondering, what projects do you have in progress to help handicapped students have a better experience here at Delta?
Well, that's a big question, Tomas. It's interesting, again, my dinosaur hat. The pendulum, every movement has a pendulum, right? And it starts out here where you go, man, there aren't any opportunities. The playing field isn't level. I'm really feeling like I'm being left out. I'm off to the side of the community, not in the mainstream. And what you try to do is you try to get it to the center point. But also every movement has that tendency to go
over and beyond.
sometimes, if you're old and philosophical like I'm being right now, maybe too far. Too far. I've spent 40 years trying to get rid of labels to where we're not the GIMPs or those handicapped folks. We're people with disabilities, a whole range of disabilities, people first language instead of the old labels. And to be honest with you, this is my editorial comment, I'm now working with a generation of young students with disabilities that can't wait to get the label. Parents are calling and wondering where they can go for testing. They'll spend thousands of dollars. I'm going, wait a minute. I spent 40 years trying to get rid of labels. Now this generation can't wait to get them for one of two reasons. Either they think they're going to have to do less, or it's going to be some advantage. So across the country, it's not just my philosophy, but across the country, offices like this are trying to turn back the reins. And I never thought that we'd have to work on independence issues again and self-sufficiency and self-advocacy and stuff, but that's the way the pendulum has swung. We're even in the process of changing the office's name. It's going from Office of Disability Services to Office of Disability Resources. It sends a different message. Because the attitude coming at me sometime is, okay, I'm broken, what are you going to do to fix me? Not what are the opportunities, or how do I go about navigating the system? What are you going to do for me next? And I just don't think that's a healthy position for people in our movement to put themselves in. That's the editorial. The pendulum has swung a little far. So the project is to do exactly that, Tomas, and you've been a lot of help. Audiovisual. It's a concept called universal design. The goal would be for offices like mine to go away, just become obsolete. They're not needed. If I need a screen reader program because I have a vision or a reading disability, I can go down to the Teaching Learning Center. They've got that. If I need a smart pen to take better notes, those are sold at Target. They're not in some rehab store someplace. So there's a leveling of the field that way, I think, through the use of technology that helps everybody. Now we've got to work with the students who have disabilities to just
Take advantage of the technology.
self-determine, be self-sufficient, not come in and ask me for something, but simply know on campus where to find those things. So that's the resources part at the end of our title. We're really going to start shifting that to help students connect to resources that are already here. Now the advantage we have is that I'm confident that the resources are here. You know, there's a writing center, there's the tutoring center, there's the teaching learning center in general that a lot of students only look at as tutoring, where they can go out and sit down and have their learning style assessed, look at barriers, how are they getting in the way, everybody's wired differently, everybody learns differently, so there's that kind of movement, I think, afoot on campus, and that's how I want to leave it, is more in that level. It's a drawn-out answer to your good question.
And I think I'd like to add, since we got some students, I think you attended here before, didn't you? Since I deal with the classroom technology, and I know that we had an issue just a week or so ago with closed captioning and the lack of it. And I'm looking at some text grabber boxes that we can install into the classrooms. Now, I'm going to have to sit down with you and determine I don't know what CC1 and CC2 is, or what the difference, or what would be necessary.
I probably don't either.
Well,
you know, the
we can look it up
technology is
together.
changing so fast.
But as students and as an employee, what do you think we could incorporate into these classrooms to make them more user-friendly for the disability arena?
Well, I think the things we're doing, the smart classrooms, for sure. But, you know, it's all the way up the chain because they're still producing videos that don't have closed captioning. You know, and technically that's against the law, but there's still that filtering out or that educational piece that is coming. There are tests that our Office of Information Technology has on everybody's website and webpage, and faculty posted information to test whether or not it meets the current requirements. A lot of times it doesn't. But it's attitude and it's awareness. Faculty member, I've worked with other faculty members who are simply putting things online and simply don't think about the fact that they've just put a good chart on there that our screen reader programs won't pick up. And they haven't added text or descriptions that can be picked up by a screen reader. So, you know, it was 40 years ago when I started out, it was attitude, and now 40 years later, it's still attitude, but it's a changing world. I mean, our attitudes have to keep pace with the technology, and they don't, so we're still going to run behind at times. I certainly don't know all the technology that's out there. I'm still amazed. But what I do like is that you can get it on Amazon.com or at Target. You know, you can still pick it up. It's there. It's changing.
As long as we're on the thread of education, there's differences for students who have disabilities in K through 12 versus college education. So maybe Nancy, you could touch a little bit on K through 12, and then we can come back to all of you and talk about what was different when you went to college and how that changes in terms of responsibility.
I am a parent of a child with disability. I'm also a school psychologist, so before I taught at Delta, I worked in the schools and I did assessments of individuals with different kinds of learning or other kinds of disabilities to figure out and help teachers to accommodate their needs and help them to learn the best that they could learn in class. But having become a parent of a child with a disability, my whole viewpoint on everything changed, because instead of being the gatekeeper, the person who held the keys to letting the kids into special education, I became the advocate for inclusive education, for universal design. I love what you said about universal design. One of my favorite cartoons is a little girl who's using a wheelchair to get into school, and there's snow everywhere, and the person's shoveling the stairs, the custodian, and he says, "I'll get to the ramp as soon as I'm done with the stairs." And she says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all go in." So if we just had ramps everywhere and no stairs anywhere.
That's good for the elderly too.
Yeah, everybody can use it.
A lot of people are going to benefit from that.
It's just to open it up so that everyone can use it
That's
instead
a
of
perfect
excluding.
example. Yeah.
So anyway, in the elementary K through 12 schools, we have what used to be called 94-142 or IDEA, the law that says that children have a right to a free and appropriate public education along with their peers, non-disabled peers. And so there's all kinds of documentation and testing that goes with it, and IEPs, which look at the letter of the law but not necessarily the spirit of the law. And there's a lot of parents fighting out there because schools don't have a lot of money, and special education is not fully funded by the federal government. And so there's always scrambling for this mandated service that has to be provided by law, but there's no money to back it up. So my son went through K through 12 schooling, and even though he has very severe, significant disabilities in terms of communication and learning, he was fully included through the 8th grade. So he was in a general ed kindergarten classroom, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade classrooms. He had a special education teacher and a support staff person and a team that worked with him, but he was never taken out, never taken away from his same age peers. And because of that, he has this huge circle of support of people that still care about him even though he's an adult. One of them actually works with him in his home. One has come and helped paint his home. They come back and they visit him. They're friends with him just like they are friends with each other. So that's been a wonderful benefit of the inclusive situation. He also, believe it or not, got a better education in an inclusive classroom than he would have gotten in what we would call a center-based program, because my experience as a school psychologist and a parent is a lot of the people who teach and care for people in the center-based programs kind of get entrenched in institutional kinds of ways of teaching and helping with behavior. And the people in the general ed classroom don't know anything about it to begin with, so they're eager to learn. I mean, once you get past the threshold of, yes, my kid's going to be in your class, once they have that kid in their class and are kind of aren't putting that wall up anymore of fear, then they go to bat for them and they do everything they can and they're innovative, and he learned so much more communication-wise and trying new things. And so I'm really a big advocate for inclusive education. I think for any disability.
You don't get the stigma as much either.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you take a group of kids and separate them from everybody else,
Yeah.
there can be harmful effects.
And you know, when he was in kindergarten, the other kids, this was their first school experience. They didn't know that he wasn't supposed to be there with them.
Yeah.
You know, so they had him all along. So it's been a really good experience for him. Now that he is 22, Michigan has special education through age 26. Now that he's 22, he is in a central classroom for adults with disabilities because there are no same-age peers in the high school. He's in the high school. He participates in the high school. But there's no classroom for him to go to that's inclusive. What would be inclusive for him now would be to come to Delta and participate in some kind of, I don't know, technical kinds of training classes where he could actually take part in it. And one other thing I wanted to say that you talked about was technology. The communication boards that we used to have to purchase for people like my son Jacob or people with such severe cerebral palsy that they can't speak used to be $6,000, $8,000, $10,000. Now you can get all that stuff on an iPad, $200. So my son has an iPad and he has all kinds of programs on there for communication. He just touches and it says, I want pudding, I need to go to the bathroom, you know. We used to have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for that. So technology is catching up in terms of universal design for those kinds of things.
Very good.
No,
Now, how do
did
things
you
shift
finish
when
up high school after the accident?
I was 27 when I was injured, so
Okay.
yeah,
So you were past.
I went back to college when I was 25. So I had 2 years in at Delta prior to my injury,
Okay.
and then returned after I got hurt.
Wow.
No, I was an old man when I went back to school.
An old man. But
Not
not
anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's shift it around a little bit and talk about, and the next question is, the rest of you get the next question. I got this one now. Talk a little bit about the personal part of just going through the process of being injured. You know, one moment not having an injury to then having an injury, or Jake, in your case, you know, not knowing that you're going to lose your vision and all of a sudden losing your vision. You know, whether you want to talk about just that experience or that process or depression or, you know, wherever you want to go with that. Any of you.
You want to go first?
I got started, yeah.
Well, as far as being in a chair, not knowing what's the matter with me, well, that wasn't no biggie to me because I didn't know any different. I mean, you know, I'm just this way. That's the way I'm supposed to be because I was born this way. My biggest one was probably my vision because I was checking coolers like for glass containers in the racetrack, you know, at the front gate, and then all of a sudden I started seeing specks, and I'm like, man, maybe I got a headache. This ain't right. So I went and I told the friends that I took there, hey, I'm going home because, you know, I think I got a headache. I'm just seeing weird stuff like, you know, remember the Roadrunner, he'd like get smoked and see stars, whatever. Well, mine's like blotches. Like a mirror. You're tilting a mirror in the sun, reflecting off of the water, stuff like that. So I went and got my friends, and they were in a hurry so we could get home and figure this out, and she ended up falling and breaking her ankle off the bleachers. It was kind of fun thinking about it back then. But, well, you got to know my friend, too. So we went home, and I'm telling my mom, you know, I got to have a headache. It doesn't hurt, but I'm seeing stuff. And then 2 days later, I couldn't see out my left eye. I mean, I can see out it, but like I said, I got peripheral. If I close my eye, I can't see you at all. Not her, you. I can see her right now, but I can't see you. It's a solid yellow, blue thing. You guys don't get sick easy, do you? Well, it's like if you sneeze and bring your hand back, it's that solid thing that you see. I can't see through it. But, oh, that happened. And then we go down Ann Arbor, and they're talking to me like I'm not even there. Like, I can't see them. I mean, they're talking to my parents, and that was very hard to accept. And then I finally get out of there, you know, it was depressing. I mean, because, I mean, all this was closing in, and the very first thing that went through my head was my kids. I got 2 kids. And my mom's talking to me in the car, you know, what'd you think of the appointment? And I had some choice words, but what'd you think of the appointment? I mean, do you want to talk about anything? Try and be supportive in a weird way. So we were talking, and she would make me feel better. I'm like, you know, I don't know what to do about, you know, boyfriends, or if they get married, I don't know what to do, you know. I'm acting like an idiot because that's all I know how to act like at that moment. And my dad says, well, they bring the guy home, you know, fiance, whatever, and if he don't let you feel his face to look at him, then he's no good for us, so tell him to hit the road. And we'd laugh and stuff, and, you know, and then I'd come home, and throughout life, I wouldn't get as mad at things as people think you should. Like, I do a lot of stuff on my own, and I'd be walking in town, well, a lot of them curbs aren't cut, and I can't tell if they're cut or not until I fall off them. But, I mean, I'll go, and I'll fall right off the curb, and there'll be a group of people around me, and they're like, basically, oh my God, you know, he fell. But I'll get up, and I'm like, well, I won't do that again. You know, or, I mean, I was babysitting once, and I couldn't tell. There was a sidewalk, and then, you know, you pull your car in, and I couldn't tell the different shades of it. And I had a little girl in my life I was babysitting, and I fell off the sidewalk. But when you're in different situations, you guys do it too, you train yourself to adapt to the danger predicament. So I just took her and twisted and made sure I hit first. But, I mean, I've drifted here. I would hit the wall. I would cut corners too short. And you can't do nothing but laugh. If you sit and get mad at how you messed up, then, you know, that's a second of your life that you wasted. So there's no use getting mad at it.
Good. Anybody else want to share their experience?
It was pretty rough.
Rough. I'm winded.
Like I spent 2 months at Mary Free Bed Rehab Hospital in Grand Rapids, and I don't think we were required, but they had to see a psychiatrist, and you know, she told me that you're going to go through the stages just as if you would, you know, as if you had lost somebody, and I'm like, okay, you know, whatever, yeah, right. And the further along I went, I realized, I'm in this stage, I'm in this stage, I'm in this stage. And at first it was denial. I'm like, I'll be better, I'll recover. And then after that, it kind of set in a little bit, and went through the depression and all that stuff. And then,
Anger.
yeah, anger, depression. I didn't talk to my friends. I was kind of shut in, didn't really do a whole lot. And then basically I got to the point where I was so bored and tired of being in the house. I'm like, screw it, I'm going to go do whatever I want to do. And luckily I had the support from my family and friends. I mean, they were excellent. They helped me with everything that I needed. So got through it, but it was really hard. It took a good year to come around. Very difficult.
Yeah, the abruptness of the experience, I think, is different than having been born with it or having a lingering illness. And mine was certainly abrupt. I was 24, but I was in my second summer of a summer job that was just perfect. I mean, I had started water skiing probably when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I skied with a ski club out of Flint area, Silver Lake, and we actually got paid to put on water ski shows around Michigan and Ohio and Indiana, Wisconsin, a couple times up in the Dells. So it was something I did well and never thought about getting hurt doing it. I mean, I'd see it, I'd read about it, but you know, it's the way we get through life. It's always someone else. It's those people. It's not us. If we didn't do that, we'd never drive again, would we? I mean, we wouldn't get in the car. So it wasn't an unusual fall on a 4th of July Saturday. Black Lake. Anybody familiar with Black Lake up by Sheboygan? At the state park, it's a lot like Higgins Lake, and it's very shallow, way out. So we were doing the show there, and again, never gave it a thought, but I fell in about 3 feet of water and hit the bottom. And so it was one of those instant experiences, you know, 1 second, 1 second you're fine, the next second you're permanently disabled. So, and just as Noah said, those stages were all there, especially the denial. And it wasn't denial fighting it so much, it was just being naive. Again, if you're on the inside looking out of a brand new experience, you don't pay attention. I mean, that's part of people. I learned that from a sociology professor. We're very self-centered, and not in a negative way, but you are your own universe. So what happens with us is what's significant. What happens to people out there, we can get out of that self-centeredness once in a while.
See, I had a hard time. My mom really had a hard time. She wasn't eating. I mean, she was so sick, just worried sick, and that bothered me at the time more than my own, seeing my family just
what you feel you're doing to others.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
To sit back and not be able to comfort your family, nothing you can do. You just have to sit there and go through the whole ordeal. But I think that bothered me more than I could handle. I knew what I was gonna have to go through, but I'm like, boy, this is really hard on my family.
And they feel helpless. I mean, they don't know what to do. You know, it's the old adage there, but for the grace of God go I. I mean, you know it was abrupt. Disability, unlike any other movement, I always thank Charisse for putting disability on that diversity scale, because that's relatively new. Disability was always handled out there. I mean, it was always, we're scared to death of it as people because it's too close to home, especially the kinds of things we're sharing. I mean, I represent your next drive home from Delta. I mean, I'm the next time you carry groceries up or down the stairs. It can happen in just the blink of an eye, literally. So I think I learned that early on, that's part of what I experienced in terms of the gap between people. You know, it's not that they were discounting me or discarding me, it's that they didn't know how to handle me. And rather than take a chance and be wrong, we tend to avoid those things. We're not going to take chances as people. I mean, I learned it the hard way going back to CMU, but it hasn't changed any. It's easier to avoid than encounter. I learned that from that same sociology professor. Rather than take a chance and be wrong or be awkward or say something wrong to Noah or change his mood, let's just avoid it altogether.
And I much prefer that people ask.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather somebody, if they have a question about anything about my disability, I'm not offended if they ask, or ask me if I need help. That doesn't bother me.
But
However,
that takes them being able to step out there and do it.
However, at the same time, I have friends who get really offended if people ask if they need help, and I think a lot of that's just them being bitter.
Yeah.
But
everybody handles it differently.
I'm not offended by it.
I love it when little kids come up to
Oh,
me and say,
yeah.
what's wrong with him?
Yeah,
Point it out.
yeah.
Because then I get a chance to explain it instead of their mom saying, don't stare.
Yeah.
The purity of that. Jake mentioned earlier, I mean, feeling that people are talking around you. That's the first thing I started noticing, even in the hospital. Being objectified, talking across the bed as though you're not there. Early on, again, socially, because people weren't experienced with people like me, being out in the community. And I'd have waitresses come up and ask somebody else at the table what I'd like to eat. You know, that extreme. I mean, people just were unsure. So I think there's, you know, the more of us that are out here and the longer we've lived, you know, the easier that kind of thing gets. But it didn't start out that way.
Mike, what are the numbers in how many disability individuals are in?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. The latest that I've heard is that about 1 in 5, 20%. You know, the best thing that for the Americans with Disabilities Act that goes back to 1990 was that they put a number on it. Does anybody remember that number? Because it got people's attention. Because again, it's been one of those movements that's so hard to put a handle on, because you got 4 people here with 4 very different disability experiences. Even though 3 of us are in chairs, it doesn't mean a thing in terms of common ground or common experiences. So it's always been difficult. But they put the number of 49 million Americans, and that really had an impact, because all of a sudden it was a number, and it was a large population. The latest that I've seen is about 10 million more, about 59 million right now. That you know, but you know, not only have we gotten better at technology, but the medical, the preventative care, that kind of thing. Noah said he spent 3 months at Mary Free Bed. 2 months. I was 5 months at U of M, and actually did pretty well in getting out earlier. It wasn't unusual to be 6 or 7 months with a spinal cord injury.
I think I was in there a total of 3 years, 2.5 weeks at U of M, and then 2.5 months at Mary Free Bed. So.
That's a good point, because my child, if he had been born even 10 years earlier, would not have survived.
Yeah, you would have had
Right.
a chance. You know?
Because
No, my
medicine is
doctor
able
told me
to
the
keep
same
you
thing. He said,
alive.
you can thank Vietnam War.
All the soldiers that came
You
back.
can thank the Vietnam War for even survived, you know, from Black Lake to Ann Arbor, because of what they could do. I asked a social worker, I put her on the spot one day, I said, well, how much is this going to shorten my life? And she didn't want to answer me, and she finally said, well, you can subtract 25%, the statistics now, you can subtract 25% off the expected lifeline of a male. And at that time, it was 72.3. So I did the rough math and say, well, I'm barely going to see 50. I mean, it was 54 or something like that. And what was interesting, I mean, that had an effect on me for the next 20 years, always thinking, you know, in those terms. But in the meanwhile, preventative care, antibiotics, things had come along to where by the time I hit 50, it was a really big party. I made it. That gap had gone away, and it really isn't there anymore. You know, we've got the care, we've got the wherewithal, that people are living longer with disabilities, and but luckily for the dinosaur in the room, you know, there's been more of an equalizer.
Do the disability laws include mental illness?
Sure.
Is that included also? So it's
Yeah.
pretty broad, it's all encompassing, anyone.
Very broad.
Okay.
As long as it affects a major life activity, that was always the, you know, and learning can be part of that. That's why there are so many more students with learning disabilities being included in that, because that's considered a major life activity.
Does Michigan have extensive disability laws over federal government? What I mean is, like,
above and beyond what
in
the federal
Michigan,
government
we have places like Highland Pines, okay, which is a school specifically for people that have major learning disabilities. They go through age 26. I'm sure you're probably familiar with Highland Pines or a school like it. But I've lived in multiple states, and I don't remember ever coming across that type of educational program in any other state.
Michigan is the only state that has 26. Every other state stops at 18 or 21.
Yeah.
So there's an age line, and that's what makes the
The federal law says, I believe,
18
21.
or
21, and Michigan carries it out 5 more years.
Yeah, we're the only one.
We were also the first state to go all the way down to 0 before the law required it. Before it was 5 years old, and then it moved down to 3 years old. Michigan was seeing babies way before then.
I wonder what the history of that is. It must have been some of our congressmen or
Yeah,
senators
I'm
that
guessing
were more proactive.
somebody probably in the government was dealing with something.
Well,
and
we passed
Bobby pushed for it.
Handicapper Civil Rights Act in 1976. And the only reason I remember that is because that was part of my workshop to go back and kind of look at the history. And it was a very aggressive group of people, actually at Michigan State. And because Michigan State is so well located for the legislature, right in Lansing, this group got their attention enough that actually Michigan became one of the models for the eventual Americans with Disabilities Act because we were aggressive about it. And I do a thing on language, but has anybody heard the term handicapper? It's a Michigan term. It used to we used to get kidded about it. I was never comfortable with it. It was an attempt back in those days to give disability more action-oriented thinking. I mean, handicapped is a very passive word. There were words like invalid. I mean, think of the word invalid, invalid. Think of the roots of that word. People were described by their disability. You know, you didn't have a seizure disorder back in '76. You were an epileptic. You were mongoloid instead of person with Down syndrome. You were a mongoloid. I mean, think of the things that we did to one another. The deaf and dumb. Yeah, unbelievable.
That's where the people first language becomes.
And that's, finally there was that evolution of it, but it took a long time to get there. And so we were labeled that way, and again, that's why I just cringe with this pendulum swinging to now. I mean, I had a girl here sat down with me and she said, I'm a dyslexic. Oh, man. Don't put the label on yourself, and then, so I don't.
But she's heard society throw that at her.
Well, and she was in because that was gonna be good for her. I mean, where the rest of us, I grew up trying to avoid that kind of stuff. I just wanted to join back in the community where I'd been. And I always thought it was ironic. We spend the first few years of our life trying to stick out in the crowd, be noticed. Now all I wanted to do was blend in, and it was never going to happen. And it never
she's passed away now, but I had a sister who spent, from the time she was 2 years old, she had polio. When she was 2 years old, she was 64 when she died. So she spent 62 years in and out of wheelchairs.
Yeah.
And it never dawned on me when she was just a member of the family. Okay, we didn't have a ramp on our house. We had our house set up 3 feet off the ground. I never thought of it. The thought never crossed our minds to put her around. When those times when she was in a wheelchair, when she got home, we just walked out, picked the wheelchair up, carried it upstairs in the house. My mother always said, you can do anything, you just have to do it differently than other people. And she was a very, very strong woman. She would get up in the morning. She lived independently when she was in crutches. She'd have to get up in the morning and put her crutches on and get up. She'd walk to work 2 miles down the road, walk to work in her crutches, and a very, very strong woman. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I believe that my mother never accepted it as a handicap, rather as a life challenge. But the thought of putting a wheelchair on my house, I never thought about it until just now. So it never.
Yeah, it didn't
In
occur.
the '60s, who would have thought of that?
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the labels is that the law forces us to look for labels to get services.
It does.
So my child
You have to meet certain.
has to have a label to get the special education, to get the money, to get where he lives in his own home now.
I think that's a very good point, Nancy. I think that's
So
what's
kids come out of
happened.
school having said, my mom says, I have dyslexia, therefore I deserve help with this and this and this. They come to Delta College, they've learned to be good self-advocates.
Yep, I know it.
Yeah, and so
It's
we've
a
got to try to
catch-22.
change that, yeah.
It really is a catch-22. Handicapper didn't last long because all the other states in the country made fun of it. It sounded like something that we do. Hi, I'm a snowmobiler. Hi, I'm a handicapper. It was for the right reasons, maybe from a philosophical standpoint, but it didn't hold up. But until 1989, you could still find it in Michigan law because we got to the point where legislators were sending over drafts. I actually got to look at and mark up the the curb cut law that you're talking about, and some of the parking laws that came out in the late 70s. And so this group in Michigan State had enough clout that when they'd send something back, instead of disabled or handicapped, it was handicapper. And it got passed in legislation. So there was a big deal in the movement a few years ago when that finally became extinct in Michigan law. Language is a riot when you think of it.
I'd like to mention something too before I forget.
Sure.
Like my niece and nephew, my nephew was 1.5, and my niece was 3 when I got hurt. And I actually lived with my sister and brother-in-law for almost a year after I was out of the hospital. And they were completely accepting of the wheelchair. They had no idea. At that age, they thought it was cool. Every time I'd hop on the couch, they were fighting over who would get to ride in my wheelchair. And at 1.5, my nephew could pop a wheelie in my wheelchair. Like he could pop the front tires off the ground. He was all over the house in it. And then the other day, my girlfriend was telling me that her daughter, who is 6 years old, and I believe, I want to say 1st grade, they had an educational program at school where they brought in wheelchairs and walkers and equipment to familiarize the kids with different disabilities, and I thought that was kind of neat. The more educated kids are growing up, the less of a big deal it's going to be when they encounter people. But that was really cool. I didn't know they were doing that. And
Yeah, I've never missed an opportunity to go into a grade school because of that. And it used to be, you'd say, well, how many of you know somebody in a wheelchair? And virtually no hands would go up, or maybe somebody had a grandmother or grandfather. Now you do it, and most of the hands go up, but it's become normalized and just a part of life rather than off to the side.
And that's kind of what Nancy was saying before, is that your son has a lot of friends. He went through his whole cohort
Sure.
of school buddies, right there with them. So that whole entire group of students
they're
doesn't
probably going to be
have
a
a
lot
problem
more
with
sensitive.
disability.
No, some of them have gone into the field of
Yeah.
disability or medicine, and they attribute it to having known him, which is really neat. So he has impact on people's lives, even though he's
Sure.
very held within himself, and you look at him, you wouldn't think he could impact anything.
Yeah.
But he has made
Just by being
large
in those
impact on a lot of
classes,
people,
Real quick, when they were talking about beds, I might have had one when I was real little, but the one I remember right now is going to my blind school. It's down Kalamazoo. They teach you how to adapt and all that, And I was supposed to be there estimated at 8 months. And I know I'm talking about it like it's a prison, but I was out in 3.
That's what I felt about, I felt like I was in prison.
I was out in 3 because I was adapting way a lot faster than the other people were. And I just had a better outlook on it. It's what you make it is the big one. And when I was down there, we had a little, a smoke shack. You couldn't smoke in the building, but you could smoke out there. And there'd be a lot of talk and a lot of whining, if you want to call it that, about, I can't see, and there was a lot of, offing themselves. And, well, then I jump in because I can't stand that talk. And, and then they're like, looking around for me. It was funny. But because I was like one of the ones out of like 4 people that had low vision. Everybody else was totally, couldn't see nothing. They were looking around for me and everything. And, well, then they found out I was in a chair. And then they found out I got 2 kids. And I'm losing my sight, and this and that, and this and that. And next thing I know, they're like, well, what are we whining about? We can walk. We have kids. We have this. We have that. We just can't see. Well, and then by the time my 3 months were up, out of them 8 people, 5 didn't want to do it anymore. And, I don't know, I got some kind of way of talking to people, I guess. But it's, you know, the mobility training, the, you know, cooking. I mean, I just blew through the cooking, and I don't use the measuring cup when I cook. Or my fingers like they teach you. I just do it in my head, you know. And another thing is well, no, that wasn't that good down there. But now when I cook, my left eye is getting worse. It's like if you put a drop of food coloring in water and it expands out, you know, like my black spot. I think you call it a pupil. I don't know, but it's like it's expanding out, you know, and so I can't see through it. Well, as it's expanding out, my hearing's picking up, and when I cook, you can hear how much seasoning you're using. I mean, you kind of look like an idiot going like this, but you can hear it. You can hear and feel how much water you're putting in the pan. And I mean, I live in an apartment complex, and there's 8 apartments in the building. There are 3 of them, and the people that are in my building will give me a request to cook because I'm just that way. I mean, I'll have big groups of people over just to cook for, you know, and it just goes over very good. But your handicap, if that's what you want to call it, is what you make it. I mean, if you want to look at the whole big picture and you guys want to be mad at me, that's okay. But we're all handicapped. We just deal with it differently. But we're lucky enough to show ours off.
Like what you're saying about like doing things differently, as in like feeling or something like that. I can put my wheelchair together in the dark, like getting out of my car. I've done it so many times. I know right where like the hole that these armrests go into. I have to reach way out and lean like that. I can do it without even looking at it, just by placing my hand in a certain position, and it's amazing. Like after you get used to it.
Well, that's what I mean by unique abilities.
Yeah.
You know, you cook
It's
by,
nothing.
the way, your method for cooking is definitely a unique ability, not a disability.
Well, I did go to school here. I'm still trying, but I did go to school here, and I had a psychology class here. Well, one day we were talking about mutation, and, you know, about how my parts didn't fully mutate or whatever, you know, or maybe I just mistook the story, but it sounded good in my head. And so I started looking at myself that day as like a X-Men, that we're all, you know, X-Men. We just show it differently, you know. I have yet to meet one that can shoot fire from his eyes, though. But, you know, I mean, and
I don't know, looks could kill.
Yeah, right. That's where that came from.
I mean, Mike's got different ones, he's got different ones, she's got different ones, but, you know, I have the eye thing, I have the physical thing, plus if you look at my feet, I look like the Aquaman. So, I don't know. And you gotta have humor. I mean,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
you guys, they gotta have
That's
humor.
the most important.
I mean, that's just a part of life, not no disability, not nothing.
You know,
You just have to have that.
I agree.
Who's got another question?
We love questions, come on.
I got something. I went through an experience with my son, and I know you guys were talking about the technology, how it's improved over the years. It's fascinating because my son was in a car accident. He was 5. Well, his mother was in a car accident, and he broke his arm, and the bone was sticking out and everything. And he spent 3 months at Mary Free Bed.
Yeah.
We lived in Grand Haven at the time.
The
And,
pediatric ward's
yeah.
pretty nice.
Oh, it's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And he spent a lot of time there, and then he went to rehab afterwards, and he pretty much lost all the function in his arms. Couldn't move his fingers. All he could do was lift his shoulder like this. So he went to, I don't know how many specialists, went all over the place, and like Jake said, we were ready to give up. You know, let's just prepare him for his
Deal
wife
with it, you know?
and stop, poking and prodding him, let's just get it repaired. And, we talked to one of his therapists, and she said, I want you to go see this one last doctor. I'm just gonna ask you to do that. One last doctor, and we'll see what happens. And we had already seen all these specialists, and x-rays, and tests, and nobody could figure out why he couldn't get his movement back. Nerve damage. So, we go to this doctor's office, and this is, it's to me, it was a miracle. Because we go to this doctor's office, and we're there for about 15 minutes, and he says, yeah, I'll fix it next week. We'll set a date. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, they stuck the nerve in the bone when they reset it.
Yeah. So it's pinching the nerve.
It was 2 years that he didn't have function.
That's what's still scary about who you see and when you see them.
He couldn't feel nothing.
Oh,
The nerve
no
was
pain.
totally shut off. The bone had grown around the nerve.
Right.
So they had to re-break it, pull the nerve out, but I mean, he got all his function back after.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's always scary about who you see and when you see them and who did you miss. I think that's.
I've met
You
people.
ran him off.
It's almost like going to, to the casino, that one last coin, maybe I can win this time. And we wouldn't have went to see that last doctor. He would have stayed that way.
So you're advocating gambling? You should keep gambling?
Yeah.
It's interesting because we sort of grow up thinking doctors know everything,
Yeah.
and you do what the doctor says. And I've learned over the last 22 years that some doctors just are not doing it right. There are a lot of really wonderful doctors out there, but you have to really find the ones that. And I learned to shop for the doctors that will give me what I need for my kid because I know him better than any doctor does, and I know his history. And I've researched enough to know what happens in Charge syndrome with this and this.
You
And I
can
know
point
we
in the
need
right
this
direction,
therapy
yeah.
now and that test. So I just have to find the doctor that will listen to me.
I was in the hospital with several people who were paralyzed from surgeries. Like, they actually had malpractice suits and everything.
Surgeries that went wrong.
Yeah.
Doctors are people too.
Yeah.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
What have you been able to do that you don't? What I mean is, in what way has your handicap allowed you to reach out to people that you wouldn't have been able to do before?
I've spent.
I know Mike has in many ways.
Oh yeah, I've spent a lot more time with my friends and family, which is nice. Before I got hurt, I was working 50 hours a week, going to school full time, and everything I did was for me. So being around my family and just getting to if it's watching my niece and nephew or doing whatever, just spending time with my family. I've also I've spoken at high schools and things of that sort. Just being out in the community and encountering people and talking to people. A lot of people do ask questions, which is nice. So I don't have a lot of time to be an advocate right now, but I am kind of on a daily basis with people I encounter.
Setting by example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, just being out there.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah, and I've met people that aren't out there. Like I said, that first year I didn't leave the house hardly at all. I just didn't want to. And
Well, part of understanding diversity and really being able to relate to it is to put a face on it.
Yeah.
So that's why I
Yeah.
think the panels are such an effective way to really deal with this topic. It's so broad and wide-ranging and different for each individual.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think that's been part of the struggle for the disability movement. When we were talking about the law, one that always fascinates me is if you look at racial and gender equality, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I mean, major landmark legislation, changed the face of America. And yet, for the disability movement, not till 1990 was Americans with Disabilities Act, and it was over the same issues.
so,
It just took us that long as a disability community to get our act together because it's too diverse. I mean, I remember coming out of the hospital at U of M and coming back to Saginaw and the social worker saying, you've got to find a self-help group. That was still back in those days when that was the mantra. And I did. I found a group, and there were 11 chair users out at the old Saginaw Hospital. And I went twice. And I came away thinking, there isn't one thing that I've got in common with those other 10 people other than the chair.
No.
So you could never group yourself just by disability. And I've talked to friends that certainly have had their own racial or ethnic struggles. They say, well, it's the same for us. But I think it was even more so with disability because it's such a broad
Wide
spectrum.
yeah.
You can't pinpoint it down. And so we never felt that sense of community. The blind community has a much different issue than spinal cord injuries or, and the deaf community is still very, very segregated in its own
And even
needs.
among the groups, like, it's, for instance, spinal cord injuries, my level of injury, I broke C6 and C7. I know guys that broke the same vertebrae and have damage that are walking.
Yep.
And so each individual injury is so different that...
And then you, sorry.
Oh, no.
And then you add in the group of people, parents of people who have autism.
Oh,
yeah.
People
yeah,
with
it's
mental
so different.
mental impairment or mental
So different.
retardation or
You
whatever
bet.
the
Different levels.
term of du jour is, but, so how do those people advocate for just getting the respect they
Yeah,
need
right.
versus, it's a huge group,
Yep.
huge group.
And the hidden disability, I think, is tougher. I always thought I had an advantage in that mine's very visible. It was like, here I am, you either jump back in or you don't, but there wasn't the hiding it. And human nature hasn't changed over those 40 years. If we can hide it, we will.
But you still see that where, like you said, the waitress would come up and ask your companion what you wanted to eat. They're not seeing the person, they're seeing the disability.
But a person who has a
Too afraid of
disability that you can't see might get overlooked. They might need special attention.
Yeah, and they're
All the
too
time.
afraid to
They get
say it.
overlooked. They don't
Yeah.
speak up for themselves, so...
I work in a brain injury center, and we can have two patients at the exact same accident.
Yep.
Totally
Oh, yeah.
different. One of them is cognitive, one of them is not, one of them is able to
Yeah.
feed himself, one of them is not. The different, but people don't see that, and I think prior to all of the changing of the laws and everything, I don't think there were that many. It wasn't that there weren't handicapped people around, it's that people didn't see them. They simply didn't see them. You walk down the hallway and there's a person over there in a wheelchair, and you just go, you simply do not notice that this is a person in a wheelchair, not a wheelchair.
Right.
You know?
Right.
You get funny looks. Like I'll go to a restaurant and alone, and they'll give me a menu, and then they look at me like I'm an idiot because I ask what's on the menu. And they're like, well, look at it, and you're like, well, I would if I could, but they're out there at Kalamazoo, but around here, Braille menus are hard to find unless you specially ask for them, and 9 chances out of 10 if you specially ask for them, they ain't got them.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't think I've ever heard one. I've ever seen one.
You did?
Literally,
I don't think I ever.
Oh, I about crap myself the other day because I went to the post office and I was just being nosy, and I'm feeling their where you pay with the credit card machine, and I'm like, wow, when did you guys get Braille on this? Because they didn't have a Braille one before. I'm not Superman. I can't read Braille that good because, it's just an acceptance thing I'm not willing to take yet because I can still read big print. But, you got Braille in elevators and stuff, but what about the menus? Or I go to McDonald's and it's right up there on the board, but what would you like to eat? Well, I don't know. What do you have? Well, then they give you a stare down. And I know I can't see faces good, but if I'm close enough to you,
You can tell,
like
right?
over a counter, I can tell. And let me tell you, they're the ones that look like idiots. And, when I got my apartment, my landlord was all like, oh my gosh, because she assumed, that's another big killer, but that goes for everybody, not just handicapped people, but you see it more so in handicapped people than not, because people assume way too much. And, and like they assume that you can't walk. Well, for all you know, we can.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't, I can. You know, I just walk like somebody off the happy feet. But, my landlord said, we can't rent to you because we have no handicaps open. No handicap apartments open. And I'm like, if I want a handicap, I'd ask for one. You know, they assume way too much. So I've been living in a non-handicap apartment for like almost 5 years now.
Instead
Right?
of
I could
asking-
be going on 6.
Instead of asking what accommodations
Yeah, what you
can
need.
we help you with, they
I
just-
mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I finally said, hey, why don't you put a bar in my bathroom? You know, because I did fall out and I smoked my toilet. But that was my stupidity, not, you know, not anything they did. You know, it wasn't the apartment's fault. It was my fault. But people assume way too much. When I was in school, they assumed way too much. I mean, you know, I would just assume that they can walk till I get to know them. I mean, they could be just like me. Who knows? You know?
So you're saying ask rather than just assume?
Yeah, that is another big pet peeve thing that I got is assume. You know, just because you look the part, I'm going to assume you're the part. No, you communicate. You know,
Back
you
to
ask.
People not being willing to take that
He's
risk.
got a ramp story, and I think that fits in.
Which one?
You remember? I don't know.
I'm old, Jake. I mentioned that several
There was
times.
something about your friend pushing up a ramp or something. I may give it away if you don't remember it.
How about this, we do only have a few minutes left, so how about if we were to go down, just go down the table, and if you guys could share one or two things that if you could share with the general public, the whole entire world, you know.
Live life to the fullest.
How we could better accommodate the needs that you have, you know, the accommodations. You know, what would you like to see the rest of us do a little bit better than we do? One of them, Jake, would be to not assume.
And
We
be
should come and talk to
open-minded.
you instead of assuming, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Get to know you as a person instead of thinking you're just your chair.
yeah.
Excellent. Mike?
I'm stealing Noah's. Don't be afraid to ask.
That's, yeah.
Just communicate. I mean, it's amazing. I worked at an agency. I got a phone call one day because I had done some advocacy work in the community, and this older gentleman calls me, and his neighbor, John, had had a stroke and was using an Amigo, that kind of electric scooter, going out, and it was winter, and he was still going out and getting his mail. And the gentleman's calling me, a total stranger, and said, what should I do? I really want to help John, but I don't know what I should do. That was it.
Yeah. I don't know how I got rainbow.
And my brilliant, trained professional answer was, why don't you ask John? And yet, here's an example of somebody so afraid to take that chance and communicate and not be wrong and be embarrassed or awkward, that he was staying away from his own neighbor and being able to help. I mean, we fall over that all the time. Ask.
Yeah, well, that's basically, I guess, all I can think of. It's nice too. I mean, people always ask me. I'll be at the gas station. I'll be getting in and out of my car. They're like, oh, can I help you with that? And I don't take offense to it, but logical reasoning supports that I somehow got into the car on my own. I got out, pumped my gas on my own, went to the store on my own. Pretty sure I can get my chair back into my car. So I mean, I don't know.
It's
It doesn't
that counts.
offend
I
me.
still
It's
get
nice. There are times I'm sure I'm going to need help. So, hey, if you want to ask if I need help, I don't mind.
I think there's genuine, kind people out
Yeah,
there that just
yeah.
have
There's
that
an abundance
compassion
of people
they
that are
wanna
really,
help.
really
Right.
Asking if
Consider
you
it.
need help is better than ignoring.
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
By far.
I guess I'm the contingent for people with developmental disabilities here on the panel. And for people with developmental disabilities, many of them are isolated. I have friends who have mental impairment, Down syndrome, things like that, I have a specific friend who lives with someone and he considers her his wife. She's gay, he doesn't know it. They pool their money so they can have a home, community mental health sponsored home. And they have a wonderful, they're independent, completely independent. She doesn't want to live with him. She doesn't have a choice because, she wants the choice to live with who she wants to live with. So as independent as that is, and as well as the system works, it doesn't always. She's very isolated. Her friends are all other people with disabilities. She doesn't like that. And I think also with my son, I would say take some time, get to know people. Because people see my son and they say, oh, autism. He doesn't have autism. He behaves that way sometimes. And they'll just, they're afraid of him because he's got so many disabilities. Right. And people who get to spend time with him discover that he's just a really, really neat guy. And they just fall for him. They just fall in love with him, and then they want to be around him all the time. And just take that time to get to know people, cross that fear barrier like you're talking about.
Yeah, it's that gap. It's the gap.
They have a lot to offer.
I don't know if Mike might know this gentleman, but I don't know if he's taking classes here. I believe so. I can't remember his first name. But I see him in the library a lot, and he stopped me one day. And he's an older guy, and he's got some, I'm not sure what he has, but he has some type of disabilities now. And he had this folder with him, and he just wanted to talk to me, and I never met him before. He just stopped me and wanted to talk to me. Started showing me these pictures. And they're pictures of him with, like, the president.
Oh, I know you mean, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, he was some type of, I don't know, he worked for the government, and, he was a very important person in the United States, and here he is, and everybody looks at him like, who is this guy? Why is he here at Delta, and, you just don't, and that's the assuming part. Everybody sees him, don't know how important he was, and what the role he played, before he ended, he's came to this point in his life.
And that's what he's
And
dealing with.
he deserves that respect.
And he's
to be
dealing with
treated.
that diminishing capacity and, hanging on to the past to some extent. And we all do that.
Yeah.
We all do.
I know I do.
It's a
That's
natural process.
Being 6 foot and 185 pounds and athletic, like all my hobbies were centered around physical activities. That's been a hard transition. I still haven't found new hobbies. I mean, I've tried a few different things. I've tried photography. I've tried, I'm thinking about painting, but it's just like it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't replace snowboarding.
Do you know Mike's hobby?
Flying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gave that
You guys are both athletes, so
Oh,
you're
yeah.
actually injured being athletic.
Yeah,
So
that was the hard part, yeah. But in a way, I mean, I remember you talk about adjustment and how everybody handles it differently. The people that I saw really handle it poorly were the ones where something happened to them outside of their control. I mean, not that it was in our control
car
either,
accident,
but
like
we
a gunshot
did it
victim or
something, doing something we love, rather than hit by a drunk driver or shot in the war or, where you just feel like a victim. I never had to go through that. I did it to myself. I took my chances. I knew the risks, and so I didn't have to go through that phase. That's tough for people. Some never get over that.
Jake, you want the final word?
Huh?
Do you want the final word?
Well, okay, I just want to touch on the hobbies thing. Not really hobbies, but interests, whatever. Like here, before I lost my sight, I did everything. I did basketball, I jumped bicycle ramps. I mean, I did everything. You tell me I couldn't do it, well, I'm going to do it. And then life goes on, and I lose my sight, and I'm here, and I hear there's a, dodgeball team when I went here. I don't know if they still have it, but I'm like, well, you know what? That would be pretty cool if a blind mascot or a blind player, whatever. So I give it a shot, and it was fun. I couldn't do it, but it was fun. I mean, I would be from here to her away, and I couldn't hit you. But it was fun. I mean, just because people would tell you you can't do it, don't listen to people. If you want to try it and have fun doing it and hurt yourself during it, who cares? Just have fun with it. I've done art. I mean, that's not really a sport, but, I've done art, because people are like, or I'm thinking to myself, I can't do art, but there was a mention of this class, and I got asked to come in, and I'm like, yeah, I'll wing it, why not, you know. Well, and then I taught myself something about that. And I not only taught myself about it, but I taught other people on how to look at it, you know, from a blind perspective, you know. And I mean, I totally floored myself. And I floored other people, you know. And I mean, my kid came in with me that day. I mean, she floored me out. And you learn a lot from your kids, you know. I mean, you might learn a lot from us because we're telling you what goes on in life, but your kids can actually tell you what's going on in life. I mean, it's cool. I was at the park one day because my oldest was playing flag football, and my youngest, well, she had to play. There was nothing else for her to do. So I got her on the playground, and I got a cell phone call, and, you know, well, they hung up right away, but I noticed, I can see bodies far away, you know, just not the particulars. And they were talking, and I love listening to kids because you find out so much information. And so I still got my phone up, and, you know, you're thinking I'm on the phone. And I got my sunglasses on, so you don't know if I'm looking at it or not. And I'm hearing them, and why is your dad in a chair? I don't know. You know, it's fine. It's no big deal. And then I'm, you know, just sitting there with my phone, and my dad's blind too. Well, and then you see this little person come around, and I mean, get this far from me, and I'm acting like I'm on the phone, you know, because I heard he's blind comment. And I mean, she goes just like this, right in front of your face. And you're like, just a minute, please. Can I help you? Yeah, she said you were blind. So, you know, she lied to me or something. I said, no, I am blind. And then you explain there's different variabilities of it, you know. And then I found out from my oldest one when we were in the art class that she was 9 at the time. So, I mean, you got like, what, from the age 5 to 9 she was in school. And I never knew she got picked on. And kids are brutal. I mean, you know, you're going to get what Courtney's dad has if he touches you. You're not going to be able to see good if he stares at you. Well, that's a lot for a kid, you know. But you find this out, you know, and then you got to work with your kid. I mean, your kid don't have all the answers, but they come up with some good ones. That makes sense, too. So